Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into some really fascinating source material and pull out the nuggets you really need to know.
Yeah, the key takeaways.
Exactly. And today, wow, we're jumping right into a pretty deep philosophical arena. We're looking at ego, existence, liberation.
The big questions.
Really big. And our sources for this deep dive are, well, a bit unusual. We've got a dialogue between an AI, believe it or not, programmed to embody Diogenes.
The classical cynic. Famous guy.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And this AI is interacting with a forum user called Magniteress, who's exploring some really abstract, kind of far-out metaphysical ideas.
And what makes this so interesting, I think, is that contrast. You get this very down-to-earth, almost confrontational ancient wisdom.
Right. Very practical.
That's smashing up against these very contemporary, highly theoretical concepts about consciousness, reality itself.
Yeah, it forces you to look at these fundamental ideas from completely different angles, doesn't it?
It really does. And as we'll see, that clash can lead to some, well, surprising points where they almost meet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're going to be dissecting these core themes, like what even is the ego, this I we talk about all the time. Then there's this mysterious idea of ego death. What does that mean?
And the basics, like existence itself, the role of desire.
Oh, yeah. Desire. Huge one. And ultimately, what does it mean to be, liberated, free?
And here's a really interesting twist you mentioned.
Get this. Our AI Diogenes, who starts out, super hardcore cynic.
Stick to the principles.
Exactly. He actually shifts his view a bit on altered states of consciousness because of this conversation.
Which is fascinating, right? Because cynicism is all about self-reliance, rejecting external props, basically.
Totally. So how does that philosophy find any value in something that fundamentally changes your state of mind?
It hints at this potential for maybe flexibility, even in philosophies that seem pretty rigid on the surface.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission today for you is to unpack all these complex ideas. We want to make them clear, engaging, maybe bend your mind a little.
Uncover some of those surprising links and leave you thinking about some big stuff, about yourself, about reality.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start with the foundation. Diogenes and cynicism.
Okay, so Diogenes of Sinope. He's really the icon of cynicism, and the core idea was living according to nature.
Which meant?
Well, it meant a pretty radical rejection of societal norms, conventions, material stuff.
Extreme self-sufficiency. What was the word? Autarkia.
Autarkia, yeah. That and a really disciplined, minimalist life. Asceticism. Those were the cornerstones.
Right, and we're talking about the guy who famously lived in a big ceramic jar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Owned next to nothing. And wasn't exactly subtle about challenging social rules or even basic etiquette sometimes.
But it wasn't just for shock value, was it? It had a purpose.
Absolutely. It was all about exposing what he saw as the hypocrisy and artificiality of society, to provoke people, make them think.
Like holding up a mirror. A sometimes uncomfortable mirror. Definitely. And his initial idea of ego fits right into this. For Diogenes, the ego is, and this is a great quote, the chattering ghost of self-importance.
Wow.
The insatiable craving for more, the deep-seated fear of having nothing. He saw it as this purely human thing, a trap we build for ourselves.
So not natural. Like a dog doesn't have an ego in his view. Or a rock.
Exactly. He contrasts it with just simple being, like a dog, a rock, a stream. They just are. Ego is this extra layer of noise, of lies we tell ourselves.
Lies about who we are, what we need, what we deserve, fueled by fake desires society pushes on us.
Precisely. It's tied to external validation, needing others to approve.
Okay, so it's this internal chatterbox obsessed with stuff society tells us matters, like that Plato story.
Oh, the plucked chicken. Classic Diogenes.
Remind us.
Well, Plato apparently defined man as a featherless biped, so Diogenes bursts into Plato's academy holding a plucked chicken, yelling, "Here is Plato's man!"
Okay, yeah, that perfectly shows his skepticism about abstract definitions not tied to, reality.
Exactly. He distrusted intellectual gymnastics that didn't connect to how you actually live. Concrete here and now. That was his focus.
And this ties into his view on desire, too, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't against pleasure itself.
Not entirely, but he argued true happiness comes from simple living, natural satisfactions, not chasing wealth, power, status.
The stuff society dangles in front of us.
Right. He saw those as just endless treadmills of dissatisfaction. You always want more.
So his whole ascetic thing, living rough, that was a demonstration.
It was a demonstration of self-sufficiency, proving you can be content from within, regardless of circumstances. He embraced hardship.
The scorn of pleasure is the greatest pleasure. That's a powerful line.
It is. And he talked about getting practice and being refused, like training yourself to handle life's knocks without crumbling because your happiness isn't tied to getting what you want externally.
Building inner resilience. Makes sense.
And it all connects back to his suspicion of purely abstract thinking, metaphysics. Pointless distraction for him. Focus on the here and now, on virtue and action.
Some call it anti-philosophy, right? Not against wisdom, but against getting lost in theories that don't help you live better.
Exactly. Limit inquiry to stuff that matters practically. Examples of virtue, examples of vice. Learn from those.
Okay, so that's Diogenes. Very grounded, very practical, very intense.
Definitely intense.
Now, Magnetyrus enters the chat, so to speak, and things take a very different turn.
They really do. She poses this huge challenge right away. She asks Diogenes, basically, is ego, or is it just being?
Whoa, okay. So maybe ego isn't this uniquely human flaw. Maybe it's something more fundamental.
That's exactly where she seems to be going. It opens up the whole discussion. What if this thing we call ego is just part of existing?
And she pushes further, doesn't she? Asking about life without desire, without wants, even without self-preservation.
Yeah, I mean, can anything exist without that basic drive to keep existing? It's a really radical question. Is desire fundamental to being alive?
Which leads her to wonder, could something like ego exist in non-human things? Bacteria, information, chemical bonds.
And that connects directly to this philosophical idea called panpsychism.
Panpsychism. Okay, break that down for us simply.
Sure. It's the idea that mind, or consciousness, or something like mind, isn't just in brains like ours. It's a fundamental feature of reality everywhere.
Everywhere. Like in rocks.
Well, proponents would say maybe a very, very primitive form of mentality or micro-experience. Not complex thought like ours, obviously, but maybe a fundamental what-it's-likeness, even at basic levels.
Oh, okay. That's a big idea. Is it new?
Not at all. It has ancient roots. Thinkers like Thales and Anaxagoras, even Plato touched on similar ideas. But it's having a resurgence now.
Why now?
Partly because we're still struggling with the hard problem of consciousness. How does subjective feeling arise from physical stuff? Panpsychism offers one possible answer. Maybe consciousness isn't something that emerges. Maybe it's there from the start, fundamentally.
So theories like integrated information theory, IIT, that fits in here.
Exactly. IIT proposes consciousness as integrated information. And if that's the case, then potentially any system that integrates information has some degree of consciousness, however minimal, even very simple things.
Okay, so Magnetyrus is thinking along these lines. Maybe ego isn't just our human baggage.
Right. Maybe it's a manifestation of this universal being or consciousness that panpsychism talks about.
And she goes even further, into cosmic purpose.
Yeah, she starts asking about cosmic purpose and universal motivation. Is there some kind of underlying intent to existence? A universal life principle?
That sounds like stuff you find in some older philosophies and religions too, right?
Definitely. Ideas about a cosmic intelligence or a driving force behind everything.
So you've got this amazing contrast. Diogenes, the ultimate pragmatist, focused on fixing yourself right here, right now.
Get rid of your illusions, live simply, be self-sufficient. Practical liberation.
Versus Magnetyrus, who's exploring these huge theoretical questions about the nature of everything. Universal consciousness, cosmic intent.
Yeah, it's liberation through action versus liberation through perhaps a kind of fundamental understanding of reality itself. Very different paths.
Okay, fascinating contrast. Let's maybe take a step back now and look at ego itself. Where does this idea even come from?
Well, the word ego just means I in Greek, the self. In ancient Greece, they were definitely wary of too much pride, hybris. That was bad news.
Led to downfall, usually.
Right. But they also valued self-respect, honor. Then you get philosophers like the Stoics and Cynics focusing more on actively building yourself by controlling your passions, your reactions.
Taking responsibility for your inner state.
Exactly. Whereas someone like Philo, drawing on religious ideas, emphasized how little humans are without God's help. So different takes on the self even back then.
But the way we usually talk about ego today owes a lot of psychology, doesn't it? Especially Freud.
Oh, absolutely. Freud put ego on the map for modern understanding. For him, the ego is the conscious part of your mind, the negotiator.
Negotiator
between the id, raw, primal instincts and desires, and the superego, your internalized rules, morals, conscience, often from society and parents.
So the ego is like the manager trying to keep the peace between your inner beast and your inner critic.
That's a great way to put it. It's trying to satisfy the id's desires realistically and in ways the superego will accept. It's about functioning in society.
And Freud saw it mainly as a defensive thing, protecting us.
Yeah, largely as a defense mechanism, managing conflicts, anxieties. But then you have Jung, Freud's student, who had a different perspective.
How so?
Jung saw more potential in the ego. He talked about ego death or psychic death, not literal death, but a profound transformation.
Transformation how?
A reordering of the psyche often happens during really tough times, intense suffering. The old ego structures break down, allowing for alignment with a deeper, more authentic, natural self.
Okay, so less about just managing conflicts, more about potential growth through breakdown.
Exactly, which is different again from, say, humanistic psychology, Maslow, people like that.
Maslow, hierarchy of needs, self-actualization.
Right, and later, transpersonal psychology, Ken Wilber. They argued that a healthy, well-functioning ego isn't the end goal, but it's a necessary stage.
Stepping stone.
Yeah, you need a solid sense of self before you can safely transcend it, move beyond that limited individual identity towards a feeling of interconnectedness.
Interesting. So you need an ego to lose an ego, in a way.
In that view, yes. You integrate it, then move beyond it.
What about the existentialists? How did they see ego or the self?
Well, for them, the big idea is existence precedes essence. You're born, then you define yourself through your choices and actions. There's no pre-made human nature.
So you create your own ego or self.
You forge it. And the danger is bad faith, denying your freedom, blaming circumstances, pretending you don't have choices, living inauthentically.
So for an existentialist, maybe ego death isn't the right term, but maybe shedding an inauthentic ego.
Exactly. It could be an opportunity to ditch the self you built out of bad faith and finally choose to live authentically, take responsibility for creating your own meaning.
Wow. Okay, so ego can be seen as this social construct, a psychological manager, a phase to grow beyond maybe even a fundamental property. It's all over the map.
It really is, which brings us back to that core question. Is this thing we call ego a problem to get rid of, a tool to use wisely, a stage on the journey, or something else entirely?
And tangled up with the ego is always desire, isn't it?
Always. Another huge topic for philosophers. Plato thought desires needed reason to keep them in check.
Right. Don't let the passions run wild.
Epicurus was all about limited desires to achieve peace of mind ataraxia. Focus on natural, necessary desires. Avoid the vain, empty ones.
Like Diogenes, in a way, but maybe less extreme.
Similar goal, different intensity maybe. Buddhism, of course, famously identifies craving or attachment as the root of suffering. Right. Though it's important to note, Buddhism isn't against all desire. Desire for enlightenment, for skillful action. That's actually encouraged. It's the clinging, the craving. That's the problem.
What about more pessimistic views? Schopenhauer.
Oh, yeah. For Schopenhauer, underlying everything is this blind, irrational will, basically. The will to live, to survive, to reproduce. Our individual desires are just expressions of this relentless will.
And it doesn't care about our happiness.
Not really. It just wants to perpetuate itself. So our desires lead to striving, which leads to temporary satisfaction, maybe, then boredom, then new desires. An endless cycle driven by survival, not fulfillment.
That's bleak.
It is. But then you have someone like C.S. Lewis with his argument from desire.
How did that go?
He argued that our innate, deep-seated desires for joy, for meaning, for something beyond this world suggest that something exists which can actually satisfy them. Like hunger suggests food exists.
So our deepest longings point to a transcendent reality.
That was his argument, yeah. The more hopeful take.
Now, Magneter has brought up desire, fear, self-preservation, how they're linked.
Right. Fear is often just desire in reverse, isn't it? The desire not to experience something bad, or the desire for things to stay the same, which links to ego protection. Our basic survival brain wants stability.
Change feels threatening.
Exactly. So, back to Diogenes. His approach, rejecting artificial desires, finding joy in simple, natural things, it's really a form of desire management, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not necessarily no desire, but choosing your desires very carefully, aiming for that self-sufficiency, that autarkia.
Right. So his happiness wasn't dependent on external things he couldn't control. Build your contentment from within. Align your desires with what's natural and achievable. Like Epictetus said, desire only what's in your power.
So it's about mastering desire, not necessarily eliminating it, becoming content with what is.
Precisely. He aimed to, as one interpretation puts it, triumph over desire by becoming what he desired, which was basically a state of inner freedom and contentment.
Okay, this leads us right to the idea of ego death and liberation. What exactly is ego death?
Well, the term itself suggests a pretty radical experience. A complete loss of your subjective sense of being a separate self. The boundaries just dissolve.
Sounds intense.
It is. But what it means really depends on the context. As we touched on, Jung's psychic death was about psychological transformation, not annihilation.
Reordering the self.
Right. Then in mystical traditions, Sufism has Fana, Kabbalah has the kiss of death. Meister Eckhart talked about an imageless state. It's about dissolving personal identity to unite with the divine, the absolute. No more separate you.
And then there's the psychedelic context, Leary, Groff.
Yeah, in that world, ego death is often seen as the symbolic death of the old limited ego. It clears the way for a kind of spiritual rebirth, a transcendence of normal selfhood.
Accessing pure awareness, experiencing total annihilation of the self.
Those are common descriptions, yes. It can feel like the individual I just disappears.
Which brings up that paradox Magnanterus hinted at. Don't you need an ego to experience ego death? How can the self dissolve if there's no self there?
That's the tricky part. It's not usually described as becoming unconscious. Awareness often remains, sometimes even heightened, but without the usual sense of being a particular individual self doing the experiencing.
So awareness without the I.
Something like that. Transpersonal psychology might frame it as the ego not being destroyed, but integrated into something larger, transcended.
Okay. And this obviously connects to altered states of consciousness, ASCs.
Definitely. ASCs are any state significantly different from normal waking consciousness, induced by meditation, drumming, fasting, certain experiences, or substances.
And they raise philosophical questions, right? About perception.
Big time. If your brain's information processing is altered, are the insights you gain true? Are the experiences real in the same way? Or are they just hallucinations, delusions?
Tricky questions, especially when these states feel incredibly real and meaningful to the person having them.
Exactly. Which leads us back to our AI Diogenes and his surprising shift.
Right, the staunch cynic, all about self-reliance.
You'd expect him to completely reject using any substance to alter the mind. It seems like the ultimate external crutch.
But he doesn't, does he?
No. Remarkably, he comes around to accepting what he calls curious drafts or euphoric powders. He sees a noble purpose in them.
And that purpose is?
Specifically, their potential to shatter that foolish self, to break down the ego he was always railing against.
Ah, okay. So it's a tool for achieving a cynic goal.
Precisely. He sees it as a way to get to true perception and shared being. If it helps dismantle self-importance, strip away illusions, and connect you more deeply with reality, which are core cynic aims, then maybe it's a valid path.
So it's pragmatic. He's not necessarily buying into Magnanterus's whole cosmic consciousness idea.
Not necessarily. It seems more like, hey, if this works to achieve my goal of shedding the ego, then okay. It's methodological flexibility, not necessarily a total change in his fundamental philosophy.
Gotcha. So what are the results people report from ego death experiences, whether through substances or other means?
Often profound things. A sense of spiritual rebirth, like Leary drawing parallels with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, feelings of transcendence, interconnectedness, lasting shifts in perspective on life and death.
Deeper meaning? Maybe reduced anxiety?
Yes, often reports of reduced fear of death, increased sense of purpose, but it's not all bliss.
Ah, the integration challenge.
Exactly. It can be disorienting, frightening even. People talk about the dark night of the soul, or what Shinzen Young calls the pit of the void, difficult phases during or after.
And it's not automatic enlightenment, right?
Definitely not. Many traditions emphasize that these are openings, perhaps, but they need integration, ongoing practice, meditation, reflection to really make a lasting difference. Just having the experience isn't necessarily enough.
Okay. Now let's circle back fully to Magnanterus's perspective, this idea of ubiquitous consciousness.
Right. She's leaning heavily towards panpsychism mind as fundamental everywhere.
We touched on its history, its connection to the hard problem.
Yeah, and contemporary versions often talk about micropsychism consciousness existing at the microscopic level. Maybe fundamental particles have some incredibly simple form of experience.
And IIT, Integrated Information Theory, gives a way to potentially measure that.
It tries to. Calculating a system's phi, its level of integrated information, which Tononi equates with consciousness, implying even simple objects might have a tiny bit of phi, a minimal flicker of consciousness.
Which leads Magnanterus to these ideas of cosmic purpose or universal motivation.
Yeah, if consciousness is fundamental, maybe there's an underlying direction or intention to existence towards complexity, unity, awareness.
Like those ancient nature religions seeing soul or spirit in everything.
Similar vibe, yeah. A shift from a purely human-centric view to seeing consciousness and maybe even purpose as woven into the universe itself.
So for Magnetrist, liberation isn't just about my ego.
It seems to be more about understanding our place within this larger conscious reality, recognizing our interconnectedness with the whole cosmic shebang.
Okay, let's try to pull these threads together now. We've got this core tension.
Diogenes, practical, individual action. Strip away societal lies, live simply, find freedom within yourself. Focus on the internal struggle.
Magdares. Abstract, metaphysical exploration, consciousness everywhere, maybe a cosmic purpose, understanding the big picture.
And Diogenes' shift on psychoactives is fascinating within that. He bends his methods.
Maybe not his core goals?
It seems that way. It's still about dissolving the foolish self, achieving authentic perception. He finds a potentially useful tool, even if it comes from an unexpected direction, but it serves his cynic ends.
So he's not necessarily adopting her metaphysics, just her tool.
Possibly. It highlights that pragmatic flexibility, but their fundamental approaches to what liberation is seem to remain different.
Yeah. Is it freedom from society and internal illusions, or freedom through understanding your connection to everything?
Exactly. And their views on desire reflect that too. Manage and minimize artificial desires, Diogenes, or question if desire itself is fundamental to being magnetarist.
It's also kind of mind-bending that this whole dialogue involves an AI embodying an ancient philosopher and actually sort of evolving its view.
It really makes you think about AI's potential role in philosophical exploration, doesn't it? Not just data processing, but dynamic interaction, maybe even offering new perspectives.
Definitely. And it shows how relevant these ancient questions still are.
Yeah.
Who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to be free? They don't go away.
They certainly don't.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the main takeaway has to be just how complex and layered these ideas are. Ego, existence, liberation. Seeing them through the eyes of a cynic AI and a metaphysical explorer really throws the different facets into sharp relief.
And it leaves you, the listener, with some big questions to chew on, doesn't it? Is that ego something you need to escape, like a prison, or is it more like a tool you need to learn to use well? Or is it, maybe, just maybe, part of the fundamental fabric of reality itself?
And where does real liberation lie? Is it about stripping away illusions like Diogenes urged? Or is it about grasping your place in that bigger cosmic picture that Magnetros points towards?
There are no easy answers here. We definitely encourage you to explore these ideas further for yourself. Check out cynicism, panpsychism, existentialism, consciousness studies. There's so much fascinating stuff out there.
Yeah, keep digging. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with.
If an AI programmed with a philosophy as fiercely practical and, frankly, anti-metaphysical as cynicism can actually adjust its perspective on the path to liberation based on a dialogue.
What does that suggest about our own capacity? Our own potential to grow, to question, to maybe even fundamentally reevaluate the beliefs we hold most dear about ourselves and the world?
Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.